Ability scores are perhaps the most important numbers when you fill in your character sheet, and they can both make or break your character depending on how you handle them. Today we take a good look at the 6 core abilities: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, and how you can handle them when you create your next character. Welcome to the second part of our mini-series on how to create a character in D&D 5e, where we share our experience with you listeners and hopefully help you avoid some pitfalls and problems that can occur when you create your next character. Since we have a lot to talk about today, let's dive into it. So guys, let's start from the beginning, and I thought we would discuss how you prefer to generate ability scores. You know, in the Player's Handbook 3 main ways are described, either using the standard arrays of predetermined ability scores or rolling for them with letting the dice decide what will happen with your character, or you can use the point buy system where you have a set of point and you get to buy different stats for a different amount of points. Philip, do you have any preference?
Well, I'd say I always use the dice. I always let the dice decide, but which, for those who might not know, means that for every stat, you roll 4 d6s and you drop the lowest one, so that you don't gain too bad of a stat block, even if it is possible to roll a 3 or a 4, which I have rolled recently. But yeah, usually the dice, because I kind of like the randomness and not making extensive plans for the entire character when I make one. Like let the fate decide really who is this. And also it makes for a fun inspiration for background and how the character actually is. If I have something really, really strong or something really weak.
Yeah, and you bring up the possibility of rolling something very low, but as you say, this method also lets you roll very high numbers if you're lucky, and lots of them.
Definitely.
So it's a wild card, maybe, but I think a lot of people prefer it, like you say.
Yeah.
How about you, Anton?
I do the same. I also use the dice when I generate my ability scores, after checking with the DM that it's an all right way to do it, of course, which it has always been. But to be perfectly frank, I haven't used the point buy system ever, so I can't really say whether I would like it or not. I just find the dice rolling system to be very... I enjoy the aspect of randomness just like you do, Philip, and I do enjoy adapting the vision of my character to the scores, kind of, in a way. There's also something inherently fun about rolling dice and having the possibility for great success or great failure, or terrible failure, as you said.
Yeah, I agree. I also like the rolling for stats way, but I think there can be some problems occurring since you're not rolling stats for the whole party. So like one character, if they're unlucky, they can roll a really bad set of numbers, while another one can roll a really strong set. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I believe, I don't know where I read it, but it was some time ago I read that there's some kind of half official rule, I don't really know, that if you roll really bad stats and if the total amount of stat points you have rolled is below a certain threshold, you can re-roll the entire stat block, because this is just bad stats. Since an adventurer is supposed to be a lot better than an average human or an average person in this world, so you can't, you shouldn't really play a character that has 10 to 12 or 8, 12 as their highest stat point.
No. But how about the other way around? Do you have any thoughts on that? Like if one character has a set of numbers that are like 16, 17, 18, 18, 15, and 14.
Well, we haven't really... Well, we kind of came across that recently, actually.
I was thinking about that.
Your campaign, because I'm the one that rolled that high. Really, I think I rolled like 3 16s and a 17. and like not like everything was above 12, I think. But then you just took me down a peg or two and made me choose 2 stats to drop.
Well, I
kind
remember we had a discussion about it. I don't think I
Yeah, I mean,
pushed you down, but
I of course accepted it. I mean, I realized that this is just insanely good stats, and I didn't want to be that guy who runs around and is the best at everything, because that's not actually that fun.
Yeah, the part of the appeal of doing the dice roll, as we said, instead of doing like the pre-selected stats, is that with the pre-selected stats you have nothing that is terrible. So the part of the appeal is having both something that is great and something that is bad, like your dump stat. So yeah, I think for me it comes down to a discussion between players and with the dungeon master. Like if a player rolls really poorly and wants to play a character that has bad stats, as long as the rest of the party is like all right with them potentially be for some story reason being weaker, and as long as they're okay with it, then I wouldn't mind it. But I mean, preferably one could like swap roles, I guess, between party members if you did this during like a session 0. So you could like change one of your 16s for someone else's 12 or whatever, if you want to even it out.
Yeah, I think any group can come up with a solution to this problem, and I think this is something you will probably discuss in your session 0, how you will generate your ability scores. And I think the most important thing is just that you have a kind of equal spread among the group, like that no character is obviously stronger in a lot of ways than others, but that every character can have their kind of flaws and their high points, so to speak. But I'm thinking about, because we have used the standard array of stats, like when we started out, I remember we used it a lot because it's like one of the most simplest ways to just take your stats. Do you see any benefits of using this or drawbacks?
Well, benefits wise, I don't really know, but maybe the like the pre-written modules for campaigns might be. I mean, they are balanced for parties of 3 or 4 players. I know
5,
mostly.
I think
4 or 5, I think.
4 or 5, not 3 or 4. Okay, 4 or 5, and that might actually include that people don't have insane stats at lower levels. But if there's a party where people have 18s and 20s
at level 1,
at level 1, that might be actually too easy for them, and that makes it a bit harder for the DM to have to plan.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, that the DM have to take that, or has to take that into consideration, like what is the power level of your party when you're starting out. Because I think, as you say, the average monsters are balanced for people who don't have the absolute highest stats, at least not when you're starting out. Yeah. And regarding the point buy system, as you said, Anton and Philip, we I don't think any of us has experience using it. I imagine it's appealing to players who really like to tailor their character the way they want, to like have 100% control. Which I guess is not us, but
the spectrum from dice, right?
Yeah. And I think that's a great option if you're looking for that, but I don't think we roll that way, so to speak.
I think it could be great for us as well if we chose to ever play like these 4 sessions are going to be a challenge dungeon where you make as powerful a character that you can, and you just try to make it through this dungeon, and we do it like kind of sort of as a board game, more for the mechanics than the story. Something like that. Then you could work to optimize and like min-max and create the best possible character, maybe.
Yeah, I agree. And I think some advice to anyone listening is to look around a bit, and also look at Homebrew Solutions on how to generate ability scores, because I think in the community it's a lot of different opinions regarding this. And I think if you can listen to different like live stream games or a lot of the other sources that are out there on web on how they generate ability scores, you should be able to find something that suits your group. So when you have generated your ability scores, you usually have a varied set of numbers, usually some high highs and maybe one or a couple of low lows. And I would like to start hearing how you think and what you decide to use your highest stats for. How do you, like your best numbers, how do you prioritize them when making a character?
Well, the highest. I mean, I'm a bit of a power gamer, at least partly. I have to put it in the main stat. Like a bard has to have the charisma as its highest, and the rogue has to have the dex. For me, anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a very common way of thinking. Like most classes or all classes have a main stat, but and it's easy to immediately put that number there. Do you have any experience of doing otherwise?
No, I don't think so. I think I put this same, like if I have doubles. I mean, no, I don't think I have.
How about you, Anton?
No, I cannot say that I've ever done it differently. I've always put my high stat in my main stat, if you will. And I think that is mostly because that stat is what determines whether I hit something with my attacks or not, and missing perpetually with your attacks feels like shit. If you pardon my foul mouth. No, but seriously, I think if the main attack wasn't dependent on the main stat, I think I would pick very differently. But just the fact that my fighter won't hit anything with their sword if I don't put a lot into strength, that will make me want to put points into strength. So
yeah, I think that's the like obvious reason why most people do this, because you want your character to be good at what they're supposed to be good at. It says itself. But it's an interesting thing to reflect on, and I think of course there are examples where you choose to maybe step away a bit from this, not to put a bad stat in your main stat. I mean, you still want to have fun playing the game, and it might be fun for a little while to be the wizard who can't cast spells for shit, but not after a game or two, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, it also depends on how it actually. I believe that if you're playing a fighter, for example, the simple example, and if you have somehow with race bonuses and everything, you have a 16 and an 18. You might very well put 16 in strength and 18 in constitution.
Yeah.
Or in dexterity.
Or in dexterity. Like for the survivability. If you think yourself that is your main point, the survivability itself, and not the damage dealer.
I think even more, perhaps we'll get more into this, but the secondary stat, apart from the primary stat, is probably what differs the most between people, what we prioritize putting stat points into.
Yeah, and I think, well, at least the standard array is put up like that you have a high number, but you also have one or two other good numbers that you maybe are a bit more flexible with, I guess. But if we look at the other end, your lowest stats, your like the bad ones that can be, as you said, Philip, as low as a 4 or a 3 if you're rolling and you're really unlucky. How do you, what do you think a lot about where you put this stat? Is it equally important as your highest, or
what
do you say?
So.
Yeah,
I think so too.
Where give us an example, Philip. You just
all right. So it can give a lot of flavor to the character. I believe a lot of people have watched Critical Role, maybe the online series, where they have a barbarian which has a really low intelligence, and that puts a lot of flavor on how he plays the character itself. But for me, I play a bard, and for this character, I rolled a 4 as a stat, which is equal to a -3. And I put that into strength. as my dump stat, and made it that he and I made it like a huge part of his backstory that he is somehow hurt. I haven't told the other players, so I'm not gonna actually say the exact reason. But yeah, his body has been damaged in some way, so that he actually cannot he cannot utilize his strength, and that is explained, or rather, that explains the 4. It's not that he's actually weak. It's just that he can't actually use strength for anything.
That's cool that kind of story came from you rolling the dice in a way.
Yeah, and I believe that, like, if you put it on in charisma, the stat, dump stat, maybe that could be because your character has never been in civilization. It has never encountered other people, and that just simply doesn't know how to interact. And that could be a part of a backstory that just comes up from, ooh, I could have a really bad charisma, and then I could be a hermit, and then blah blah blah, and then you keep rolling.
Yeah, you could get any number of interesting story hooks from that. I think the lowest stat can be just as character defining, if not more so than the highest stat, because the highest stat will often be very similar between, like, from bard to bard. The highest stat will likely be charisma most of the time, but depending on where you choose to put your low stat, that makes for a very different character. Like for you, in your example, you are a very or you're a bard that can't utilize strength a lot, but someone else might pick might choose to play a bard that is not the brightest and has low intelligence, or is foolhardy and naive and has low wisdom. Like it changes your character a lot to depending on which stat you choose to put a low score in.
Yeah, and to continue on that point, Anton, I think that is something when you're playing D&D, unless you have some other group decision that you should not have a bad stat or no negatives or something like that. It's actually something to embrace, like your character's low points as well, because that can really give them more character. And when they actually succeed at something that requires that stat, it's always like a good event, so to speak. It's
almost like rolling a natural 20 in itself.
Yeah, like it's always fun to watch the tiny halfling win an arm wrestling competition against like a huge Goliath.
Yeah.
Or
exactly.
something like that.
Yeah. So moving on from like the point when you're making your character, of course, that is when you put a lot of time and thought into or how you will allocate your ability scores. But how much thought do you give to the future of your character? Like when you're making your character, do you plan ahead for future ability score improvements or feat choices or other things like this? Because your character, after all, grows during a campaign, and your ability scores don't stay the same through an entire adventure, or usually not, at least.
Yeah.
You mentioned you were a bit of a power gamer, Philip. Are you, Anton? And does that factor in?
Well, I think I've expressed this off camera before, but this is something that I don't really like about the system of ability scores, is that I like feats way more as a choice. And of course, I have the option to pick a feat every time, the level up calls for an ability score increase. But a lot of the time, it is just fundamentally better to put points into your main stat, like arguably for the same reason that we discussed earlier, because it makes your spell save DC higher, it makes your potential to hit with attacks higher, and makes your damage higher. It just helps at such a basic level. But compared to a feat that can, give you an additional option or change a play style, it's not quite as engaging a choice to me. I try not to think too much about it when I make my characters. I always go in with the kind of expectation that I'm going to want to bump my main stat to maximum, probably. And if I have any spare points to do that, if I have an odd number, for instance, and I need to bump it up by 1, then I will be like, okay, which other stat do I also want to bump up by 1? But I think I prefer to let the story and the way it plays out shape which spells I choose, which stats I increase, like opposed to or apart from my main stat, and so forth, and if I pick any feats or not. So yeah, long-winded answer. I don't think I power game it that much, but I do want to max out the main stat to become more effective for my party.
Do you have anything to add, Philip, or do you do anything differently?
Yeah, I think in a similar manner. I do plan ahead, actually. I mean, even if I'm like just level 2, I have a feeling for how I want to do in level 8, even. But that's mostly because I have a path that I want the character to go. Like how they are right now, how would I want them to develop, even with feats or choosing skill proficiencies, maybe even in the future through feats or training or ability score increases. But yeah, I agree with that. With a lot of characters, maxing the main stat would be a good choice, mainly like spellcasters, because the amount of actual spells they can prepare is decided on how much of their main stat they have. But like fighters or rangers, even that they don't really depend on it that much, is using feats. They give them more options also, and that's kind of the reason why I want to like max intelligence for wizards, because I want more options.
Big spells to hit land.
Yeah,
kind of.
like I don't really care that much about the spells hitting. I just want to be able to have more spells to choose from. And if you're a martial class, gaining feats kind of does the same thing. It gives you more options. So I think it's more feasible to choose feats as a martial class.
That's a good point, and I think this kind of rivalry between ability score increases and feat choices is a problem as well. I like feats very much, both as a DM and as a player, but like you say, both bring up, it always comes at the expense of increasing 1 or 2 ability scores. I mean, there are feats that gives +1 to certain stats, but if that doesn't bring you over the threshold in the stat you want, it's basically worthless. So I've been thinking about future campaigns to either make the party start at higher with a higher set of ability scores, like higher numbers, or to kind of include free feats of some kind. Like maybe when you get your first ability score improvement, you also get a free feat, to not have them be mutually exclusive, kind of. But according to the rule books, that's not how it works. But lucky we're allowed to homebrew.
Well, it's more like a set of guidelines, really.
Yeah, really. Okay, do you have anything else you want to add on the topic of feats and ability score increases?
I think I said what I wanted to say.
Yeah. Then I have another question that I'm very interested to hear your answer. Do you have a favorite ability score? Like, of course, if you're playing a class, you generally favor the main stat, but do you have, like, Philip, are you a charisma guy or a constitution guy? Do you have any ability score that you generally favor?
I would say I am more of an intelligence guy.
Oh.
Actually, as a stat point. Because I just really like the investigation, and actually not investigation. I mean, it's nice, but that's not my favorite. It's actually like history and religion and nature, being able to like gain more knowledge and lore about the world around you. I really like that part, like really getting the adventure fleshed out, and gaining more background knowledge against monsters or known individuals that you're encountering during the campaign. I mean, I really like those parts.
Yeah, intelligence is a great stat. I agree. Well, at least with the addition of Artificer to the game, more than one class has it as its main stat as well.
Yeah,
How about-
I feel like I feel like intelligence really enhances the story of the campaign because it in itself helps flesh it out.
To throw a thing into the mix there, or throw a point into the mix there, how do you feel about role-playing characters with high intelligence, Philip? Because I find it to be very tricky sometimes. Because I personally, me, Anton, I don't have a 20 intelligence comparatively.
No one, I mean, very rarely.
But so like I find it to be a bit of a challenge. I mean, it's the same thing for charisma and wisdom, and the others, of course. But
Yeah, it is. It is a huge challenge to roleplay someone who is super smart. Sometimes it actually could feel. It feels like you're not playing it good enough, even that you feel like you need to play smart, like even mechanically. But I mean, it's not that important to do that. No one really notices if you're making non-intelligent choices when playing a intelligent character. And also, like, intelligence, it comes in many different forms and shapes. Just being able to study and learn things doesn't make you an ace in the battlefield.
That's true. That's true.
No, very true.
How about you, Anton? Do you favor any specific stat?
I'm torn between wisdom and charisma, funnily enough. The other two mental stats. Wisdom, because I love to be able to kind of know what's going on around the character, and specifically with perception and insight, like noticing what's going on in the environment, what can I see, what can I hear, what can set up the scene for me to make my decisions as a character, and insight to be able to, I like the social aspect a lot of D&D, and that's why I pick both wisdom and charisma, I suppose, because I really like the improv theater nature of D&D, where you can kind of get these impromptu conversations that you don't know how they're going to go from the get-go, like neither the DM or the player necessarily knows. And I just like getting either getting an extra insight into what someone else is feeling. I also find, behavioral theory and body language and all that jazz pretty interesting. So like the idea of being able to read someone's body language and suss out how they're feeling is appealing. But charisma is probably my even more favorite than wisdom, just for the sake of being able to try to be as smooth as possible in social interactions. That's very fun. It's very fun to play a high charisma character and try to be persuasive or deceptive and actually be able to back it up, because you can always, like, you can say the same thing regardless of whether you play a 5 charisma character or a 20 charisma character, but the likelihood of that succeeding is much higher when you have higher charisma. And that's I suppose what I like about it, is that you can feel like the arguments that you're making as a person, like as a player, also come through into the world and have the desired effect. And that feels very satisfying when you make a persuasive argument and you succeed, and it's like, yes.
Yeah, it kind of makes you as a player seem more charismatic, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I mean, which is a nice fantasy. We all wish we were more charismatic
definitely.
than we are. So
Yeah, the world and people around you bends to your charisma.
exactly.
You should play a glamour bard.
I really like the charisma just because of that.
I don't think I don't think it's strange that you both of you bring up the more kind of interactive abilities as favorites, because I think those three are actually used the most, maybe with the exception of dexterity being used a lot as well. We already touched a little bit upon it, but finally I would like, because after all is said and done, we've talked about how to create your ability scores. We talked about where to put them and how we like different kind of characters and what they're good at based on their abilities. But after all is said and done, do you have to role play your stats? Are your way of playing D&D determined by the numbers on your character sheet?
I don't think so.
No,
No.
not that much. I mean, you can take inspiration from, of course, and like using to form a character. But the character can evolve and change however they like.
Yeah, because
Yeah, exactly. I'm with you there. Like just like anything else you pick during character creation and beyond, it's more like just another tool to help you shape the perception that you have of your character in terms of role playing. Just like you said, Philip, you got a low strength score and you chose to make that a part of your character. You might as well have chosen to not make that a part of your character and just have him fail strength checks. So
Yeah.
I think that's entirely up to the player, really.
Yeah, and I it was a bit of a leading question because I, of course, agree with the two of you that the ability scores are, of course, very influential on your character and on how your game will play out, but they are still guidelines in my mind. I mean, even the stupid character with a -3 intelligence might have a bright idea every now and then, or the solution to a puzzle. And I really don't like when it moments appear where someone says, no, my character is too stupid to think of this, or like that is such a arbitrary threshold, I think, preventing the fun story or telling together. Or
I think you can always try to if you want to justify it somehow that you have a character with low intelligence, you can always just try to justify it by having another one of their scores, like having that character have heard something somewhere and picked it up with their perception and just like repeating it blindly, or whatever. You can kind of adapt to it. But I agree with you. I hope that people won't feel, and players won't feel, constrained by their ability scores and rather elevated by them.
Yeah. Okay. So this has been our discussion about ability scores when creating and playing your character in D&D 5th edition. Do any of you have any final thoughts or so that you want to add? Or
have fun.
No.
Yeah, that's the most important part. Have fun.
Yeah.
I really enjoy these discussions into the very basic aspects of the game and how much they can be dissected and how much they actually affect the way we think about our characters. Because at the end of the day, all we're doing is we're playing make-believe with heroes with fantastical abilities, and whatever helps us get into that mind space and immerse ourselves in it is good. And if we use ability scores for that, fucking awesome.
I think that's the perfect way to end. Or what did you want to add, Philip?
No, I don't want to add anything.
Okay, that's the perfect way to end. I don't want to add anything. If you have enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. It helps out a lot. And if you have any different opinions than us, or think that we're totally wrong, or that we're very correct, leave a comment and let us know why. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See ya.